just this morning about the use of distributed ledger technology for 2.5 billion people around the world who don't have access to banking services. One of the areas that, in our own area of agriculture futures, 66 million tons of American soybeans were just handled through a blockchain transaction by the Dreyfus Company for sale to China. So Bitcoin is now being used. It's used in our American transportation and logistics system. And most importantly, the potential of distributed ledger technology for regulators to be able to do really close market surveillance. And if it had been available in 2008, if we had been able to see the counterparty credit exposure of one bank to another bank in real time with precision, that would have enabled much more precise policy choices that had to be made in a rush without good data. So I think distributed ledger technology has got an enormous potential. Now, how it will be realized, when it will be realized, what are the other challenges in it, those we can't say, but the potential seems extraordinary.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton?
I agree that the potential seems very significant. And just look around anywhere in our economy where verification and record keeping has cost that is potentially reduced is an opportunity for this technology. That's just one of them, and I hope people pursue it vigorously.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention now to cryptocurrency and to Bitcoin, since it's the most prominent. Yesterday, the Dow Jones had its single largest decline in a point scale, 4.6% as a percent, which is high, not the highest ever. That obviously generated a lot of news coverage. The dollar has faced 2% inflation or less now for many years. Bitcoin, however, has seen a 32,000% increase in its value over the last 5 years. It's declined by some 60%, I think, in just the last 30 days. What are the factors driving that kind of extreme price volatility in Bitcoin relative to securities of public traded companies or the U.S. dollar?
Well, just recently, the volatility we've seen in Bitcoin was not as large as volatility we've seen in some other asset classes, such as the VIX product, which is known as the fear index, a volatility gauge. And so we have seen extraordinary volatility in Bitcoin, but in our world, in commodity derivatives, we're used to volatility in asset classes, and that's one of the things that the emergence of a futures product is meant to do, is to provide those who are exposed to that volatility a means of hedging and mitigating the risk to that volatility.
Mr. Clayton.
I don't really know what's driving the volatility in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. They're not correlated with sovereign currencies, so it must be something different from what would drive the dollar. But that's one of the issues before us, is there does appear to be a lot of volatility compared to the medium they are supposed to be a substitute for.
So what does that kind of volatility portend for cryptocurrency's future as a potential alternative to legal tender of nation states, or in the EU's case, a transnational organization?
You raise a great point. Now, maybe that volatility tamps down to a stable, but an asset that is highly volatile is not a very effective means of exchange, because you don't know how much you're getting by the time you receive it, or how much you're paying at the time you have to pay it. If you agree a price on day 1 but have to source it on day 10, you expose yourself to significant risk.
Thank you. My time has expired. I do want to associate myself with the remarks of Senator Donnelly at the end of his remarks about the risks that cryptocurrencies are currently posing as a way for rogue nations, terrorist organizations, criminal organizations to evade sanctions, not just in trading but in hacking as well, as we've seen media reports from North Korea. So I'm glad to hear that you are working closely with our law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and I hope that continues. Thank you.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both, and it's good to welcome a fellow New Jerseyan in your role, Mr. Chairman. I have been actively following both Venezuela and Russia's interest in developing virtual currencies for the purposes of evading U.S. sanctions. Last month, I sent a letter to Secretary Mnuchin on this subject, and I asked Undersecretary Mandelker about this a few weeks ago when she was here before the committee. Under what circumstances would the SEC and the CFTC have a role in engaging or regulating the proposed new or crypto ruble currencies? More broadly, does the SEC and CFTC have a role to play in preventing the use of digital currencies by foreign governments to evade U.S. sanctions?
Our jurisdiction should be very limited in that area, Senator. We have, as I've spoken about before, we do have enforcement authority for fraud and manipulation. And so if we thought that that instrument was being used for fraudulent purposes, manipulation purposes, we would not hesitate to take authority. But this, you're probably touching on an area where the jurisdictional lapse is probably greatest for the two agencies sitting before you today.
And so let me ask you, manipulation, what if you're manipulating to avoid U.S. sanctions?
You know, I'd have to speak to our enforcement counsel to see how that fits in, but we would certainly look at it, and if...
I'd like to have you do so, and I would love to hear back through the committee. Are you interacting with FinCEN to the extent that you may have limited jurisdiction? Are you adequately integrated into the financial regulatory network that watches for illicit activities, or are there gaps that could create vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So as we mentioned before, Senator, Chairman Clayton and I are part of a virtual currency task force that is put together by the Treasury Secretary that includes the Fed and FinCEN. And we have already had our first meeting, a beginning meeting to set out some work streams. We will have more to come. And it just so happens that I'm actually meeting with FinCEN's virtual currency team this week on a previously scheduled meeting to get some introductory discussion started of cooperation between our agencies. Mm-hmm. And so I look forward to actually asking them this question as well.
Okay. And I would just say to both of you, to the extent that you have a role to play and you lack the present authorities to do so, I would love to know about that if you determine that is necessary, because I get my sense of cryptocurrencies largely driven to evade U.S. sanctions and to undermine sovereign currencies. Both of them are a challenge to the national interests of the United States. Let me ask you this. We've seen a dramatic increase in the number of initial coin offerings where private companies are using digital tokens to raise money instead of going through the capital markets. The Wall Street Journal reported that initial coin offerings grew from about 96 million in 2016 to over 4 billion in 2017. Many of these ICOs are relying on celebrity promoters to gin up the sales. For example, last year, Floyd Mayweather, the boxer, used Instagram to promote the purchase of Centra tokens. Now, I've done extensive work on consumer protections in the prepaid card space, where we've seen celebrities like the Kardashians use their status to sell products that come at a steep cost to consumers. And this feels eerily similar to that. Just the next avenue of exploitation, and I worry about unsuspecting investors that don't have the resources to understand the true risks. What can the SEC do to better protect investors who may be persuaded by celebrity promoters to purchase tokens offered in initial coin offerings without fully understanding the risks?
Senator, I'm not going to comment on a specific instance, but
I'm talking about broadly.
Some time ago, we put out an alert that said, if you are promoting securities, you're taking on securities law liability. I believe that has tamped down some of this endorsement activity. I will say it again right here. If you are promoting securities, you're potentially taking on securities law liability.
Well, let me ask you, I appreciate that, and I hope that you will think about doing more to protect consumers. Can you walk us through why the SEC at this point is not comfortable with approving ETFs with significant investments in cryptocurrencies?
Our ETF product space is largely a retail product space, and we've made it clear to the marketplace that there are a couple of issues with having an ETF that's based on a cryptocurrency. They go to price discovery, custody, and some other issues around volatility. We've let the industry know that those are issues that are of concern to us, and that we don't want to approve an ETF product with a cryptocurrency underlier until we can get comfortable with those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm sorry you both have to crane to you're next to the left, so hard to have a conversation with me. But I'm delighted to be back on the committee, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Let me first start by suggesting to you that if you have suggestions, I will probably not have the chance to see you in the Financial Services Appropriations Subcommittee before we take a look at FY19. Assuming that we're successful in the next few days on FY18 and budget caps, we'll have an opportunity to reconsider spending levels for FY18. You've made your request through the budgetary process and appearance before our subcommittee, but if there are priorities in which, as we go back to potentially increase funding in any levels of jurisdiction within FSGG, I would welcome your input as to what it is the highest priority. I heard the commentary earlier in regard to one of the questions, I think, to Senator Reid was the hiring freeze has created challenges. I don't know that we can overcome that, but if it is personnel in a particular way or other things, it'd be useful for me to know.
Thank you very much. And I didn't want to get ahead of the process, and our FY19 request reflects the sentiment I've expressed today.
I don't know that we'll see the FY19 request before we are taking a look at the potential increase in funding for FY18, depending on when the President's budget is released. But I would offer that. It doesn't need to be today if there's any suggestions you'd like to convey to me. The issue of, you may have answered this question just now with Senator Menendez, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Clayton, but you indicated why you were reluctant or unwilling at the moment to approve a ETF proposal, but doesn't ETFs, just as options do on its exchange, mitigate the concerns, reduce the volatility and increase price discovery and reduce risk? So additional products, my question really is, don't additional products help alleviate some of the challenges that we face, or is Bitcoin or cryptocurrency so unique that it's different than other items that are traded on exchanges?
Yeah, I think that the CFTC product has that effect. It's largely an institutional product, and you can take both sides of the market, and it gives people a chance. ETFs, you can take both sides of an ETF, but predominantly they're offered for a long investor, someone who wants exposure to the rise and fall of Bitcoin or other currencies just as it would. And that's a different dynamic than a futures product. And we've long taken an investor protection view of approving those types of products, which is embodied in our liquidity, custody, and pricing rules. If we get comfortable with those rules, then we can move forward.
Very good. Let me raise a different topic than cryptocurrency. One of the things that I've tried to pay attention to, and often in cooperation with the senator from Mexico, Senator Udall, is trying to modernize our IT system, particularly within the federal government. And you indicated, Chairman Clayton, about the $500 million loss in a Japanese cryptocurrency in your written testimony. We've now passed, as part of the National Defense Authorization Bill, what's been labeled as MGT Act. It's the Modernizing Government Technology. And what it does is create a fund for federal agencies to rid themselves of their legacy technologies and have access to dollars to replace that legacy. It encourages moving to the cloud, again with the opportunities for us to have better technologies and safer technology systems to reduce our vulnerabilities. I just would encourage you, you have a lot at risk in the safety and security of the data that you hold. And I'd welcome your reassurances that I'm sure you will tell me that you're spending many millions of dollars and working diligently and you have the right personnel in place. But I would guess if we ask agencies of the federal government who have been hacked themselves and whose data has been released, they would have told us the same thing prior to that occurring to